Okay, so on the left-hand side, when we do book club, I'm always going to have a panel that discusses the book we're reading, and I'm going to leave that up there for the entirety of the book. So for anybody new that comes in, they can clearly see what we're reading, the title, the author, the publication date, the genre, the background, the themes. And then in the top of the main screen will be the chapter that we're reading. So obviously this one, in the background there, you can see there, it's basically in 17th century Puritan Massachusetts Bay Colony. The book was actually written in 1850 by Hawthorne. And those are the themes of sin, guilt, and morality that it explores. So the language can be quite challenging at times, but at the same time of it being challenging, it's also very beautiful in the way that Hawthorne writes. He writes very long, extended, drawn-out, descriptive sentences, which for some of us can be very draining to read that style of writing, but I find it to be very eloquent and very beautiful. So, without further ado, squad, I think it's time that we begin our first ever book club. I'm going to put some Stryker Squad hypes and GGs right now in the chat. And I'm also going to put a whole bunch of Bob Rosses because he's amazing. Okay? Okay. So here we go with chapter 1. And it's titled The Prison Door. Oh my gosh, I got an alert that Twitch for Fun just made a purchase to support the stream. Oh my god, I didn't even know that it did anything in the chat. Twitch for Fun, thank you so much for supporting the stream and getting something on my blacksmith. Hype, hype, hype. I didn't even know it even let everybody know in chat. That's so awesome. Thank you, Twitch for Fun. I appreciate that support and getting something off my blacksmith link. That is so cool. I love that it puts something in chat so I can immediately thank the squad members for doing that. That's great. All right, squad, here we go. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Prison Door. A throng of bearded men in sad-colored garments and gray steeple-crowned hats, intermixed with women, some wearing hoods and others bareheaded, was assembled in front of a wooden edifice, the door of which was heavily timbered with oak and studded with iron spikes. The founders of a new colony, whatever utopia of human virtue and happiness they might originally project, have invariably recognized it among their earliest practical necessities to allot a portion of the virgin soil as a cemetery and another portion as the site of a prison. In accordance with this rule, it may safely be assumed that the forefathers of Boston had built the first prison house somewhere in the vicinity of Cornhill, almost as seasonably as they marked out the first vicinity. Oh, sorry, squad, hold on. Prison house somewhere in the vicinity of Cornhill, almost as seasonably as they marked out the first burial ground on Isaac Johnson's lot, and round about his grave, which subsequently became the nucleus of all the congregated sepulchres in old churchyard of King's Chapel. Certain it is that some 15 or 20 years after the settlement of the town, the wooden jail was already marked with weather stains and other indications of age, which gave a yet darker aspect to its beetle-browed and gloomy front. The rust on the ponderous ironwork of its oaken door looked more antique than anything else in the New World. Like all that pertains to crime, it seemed never to have known a youthful era. Before this ugly edifice, and between it and the wheel track of the street, was a grass plot, much overgrown with burdock, pigweed, apple pern, and such unsightly vegetation, which evidently found something congenial in the soil that had so early borne the black flower of civilized society, a prison. But on one side of the portal, and rooted almost at the threshold, was a wild rose bush, covered, in this month of June, with its delicate gems, which might be imagined to offer their fragrance and fragile beauty to the prisoner as he went in, and to the condemned criminal as he came forth to his doom, in token that the deep heart of nature could pity and be kind to him. This rosebush, by a strange chance, has been kept alive in history, but whether it had merely survived out of the stern old wilderness, so long after the fall of the gigantic pines and oaks that originally overshadowed it, or whether, as there is fair authority for believing, it had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson as she entered the prison door, we shall not take upon us to determine. Finding it so directly on the threshold of our narrative, which is now about to issue from that inauspicious portal, we could hardly do otherwise than pluck one of its flowers and present it to the reader. It may serve, let us hope, to symbolize some sweet moral blossom that may be found along the track, or relieve the darkening close of a tale of human frailty and sorrow. Ooh, that was chapter 1, squad. Oh my gosh, can we get some GGs in the chat? That was a very quick chapter called The Prison Door. Nice foreshadowing going on by Mr. Hawthorne. What did y'all think about that very quick chapter 1? We're going to move into chapter 2. Let me just update my screen real quick and put the title of chapter 2. And any discussion you guys want to have about chapter 1, now's the time in chat. If I could update my screen, that would be great. Chapter 2. And this one is called The Marketplace. The Marketplace. Chapter 2, The Marketplace. GG. Now, chapter 2 is much longer. Chapter 2 is going to go on for a little bit. Chapter 1 is very, very quick. Chapter 1 is quick. Very descriptive. Yes. I definitely love the lines about the rosebush being right near the door of the entrance to the prison. And Hawthorne presents to the reader, asks us to pluck one of the petals off the rosebush and to take it with us on this journey through this book that we're going to read. And it's kind of a sad foreshadowing chapter. Even though it's very quick, it actually has a lot to offer the reader. And he says, let's take this sweet moral blossom as a symbol of hope as we, go through this tale of human frailty and sorrow. So it's a really neat opening chapter of, the author kind of stepping out for a minute and offering us, the readers, something to take with us on this journey. So it's kind of cool. Well, it's really cool. I like it. So how is the, just before I go more into chapter 2 here, how is the audio? I don't want to be too loud, where I'm making the mic. I mean, I'm definitely not talking as loud as I normally do. When Stryker's playing a game, clearly you guys can see how I get. But when I'm reading, I definitely want it to be a lower, calmer, just kind of environment for book club that's very different from when I stream games. So does it seem okay audio-wise, though, squad? Because I can move the mic, I can lower my mic, I can not have it so close, I can do whatever. Because you guys are the ones, I should probably listen to myself real quick. Hold on. Yeah, audio seems good. Audio seems good. Okay. So we're going to move into chapter 2, The Marketplace. Next. That was interesting how they perceive the prisons with guilt and also forgiveness. Yes. 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 Like two different things, forgiveness and also the guilt. And also to, like the rosebush is there to greet somebody who is coming into the prison for a negative thing, and then also to say kind of like a farewell to a prisoner that might be released from prison. So they kind of see the rosebush on either direction and for either thing. So it's pretty interesting stuff. Okay, so we're going to do chapter 2, and this is called The Marketplace. This is a much longer chapter, so I may need to take a break in the middle to just, not a break where I leave the stream, but just I mute my mic for a minute and get some water. We'll see how I do. But I'm foreseeing a minor break where I might need to take a break just to get some water and stuff. Okay, chapter 2, The Marketplace. The grass plot before the jail in Prison Lane on a certain summer morning, not less than 2 centuries ago, was occupied by a pretty large number of the inhabitants of Boston, all with their eyes intently fastened on the iron-clamped oaken door. Amongst any other population, or at a later period in the history of New England, the grim rigidity that petrified the bearded physiognomies of these good people would have augured some awful business in hand. It could have betokened nothing short of the anticipated execution of some noted culprit, on whom the sentence of a legal tribunal had but confirmed the verdict of public sentiment. But, in that early severity of the Puritan character, an inference of this kind could not so indubitably be drawn. It might be that a sluggish bondservant or an undutiful child, whom his parents had given over to the civil authority, was to be corrected at the whipping post. It might be that an antinomian, a Quaker, or other heterodox religionist was to be scourged out of town, or an idle and vagrant Indian, whom the white man's fire had made righteous about the streets, was to be driven with stripes into the shadow of the forest. It might be, too, that a witch, like old Mistress Hibbins, the bitter-tempered widow of the magistrate, was to die upon the gallows. In either case, there was very much the same solemnity or demeanor on the part of the spectators, as befitted a people amongst whom religion and law were almost identical, and in whose characters both were so thoroughly interfused, that the mildest and the severest acts of public discipline were alike made venerable and awful. Meagre indeed and cold was the sympathy that a transgressor might look for from such bystanders at the scaffold. On the other hand, a penalty which, in our days, would infer a degree of mockery, infamy, and ridicule, might then be invested with almost as stern a dignity as the punishment of death itself. It was a circumstance to be noted, on the summer morning when our story begins its course, that the women, of whom there were several in the crowd, appeared to take a peculiar interest in whatever penal infliction might be expected to ensue. The age had not so much refinement that any sense of impropriety restrained the wearers of petticoat and farthingale from stepping forth into the public ways, and wedging their not unsubstantial persons, if occasion were, into the throng nearest to the scaffold at an execution. Morally, as well as materially, there was a coarser fibre in those wives and maidens of old English birth and breeding than in their fair descendants, separated from them by a series of 6 or 7 generations, for throughout that chain of ancestry every successful mother has transmitted to her child a fainter bloom, a more delicate and briefer beauty, and a slighter physical frame, if not a character of less force and solidity than her own. The women who were now standing about the prison door stood within less than half a century of the period when the manlike Elizabeth had been the not altogether unsuitable representative of the sex. They were her countrywomen, and the beef and ale of their native land, with a moral diet not a whit more refined, entered largely into their composition. The bright morning sun, therefore, shone on broad shoulders and well-developed busts, and on round and ruddy cheeks that had ripened in the far-off island, and had hardly yet grown paler or thinner in the atmosphere of New England. There was, moreover, a boldness and rotundity of speech among these matrons, as most of them seemed to be, that would startle us at the present day, whether in respect to its purport or its volume of tone. "Good wives," said a hard-featured dame of 50, "I'll tell you a piece of my mind. It would be greatly for the public behoof if we women, being of mature age and church members in good repute, should have the handling of such malefactresses as this Hester Prynne. What think ye, gossips, if the hussy stood up for judgment before us 5 that are here now in a knot together, would she come off with such a sentence as the worshipful magistrates have awarded? Marry, I trow not." "People say," said another, "that the Reverend Master Dimsdale, her godly pastor, takes it very grievously to heart that such a scandal should have come up in his congregation." "The magistrates are God-fearing gentlemen, but merciful overmuch. That is the truth," added a third autonomal matron. "At the very least, they should have put the brand of a hot iron on Hester Prynne's forehead. Madam Hester would have winced at that, I warrant me. But she, the naughty baggage, little will she care what they put upon her bodice of her gown. Why, look you, she may cover it with a brooch, or such like heathenish adornment, and so walk the streets as brave as ever." "Ah, but," interposed more softly a young wife, holding a child by the hand, "let her cover the mark as she will, the pang of it will always be in her heart." "What do we talk of marks and brands, whether on the bodice of her gown or the flesh of her forehead?" cried another female, the ugliest as well as the most pitiless of these self-constituted judges. "This woman has brought shame upon us all, and ought to die. Is there not law for it? Truly there is, both in the Scripture and the statute book. Then let the magistrates, who have made it to no effect, thank themselves if their own wives and daughters go astray." "Mercy on us, good wife," exclaimed a man in the crowd. "Is there no virtue in woman, save what springs from a wholesome fear of the gallows? That is the hardest word yet. Hush now, gossips, for the lock is turning in the prison door, and here comes Mistress Prynne herself." The door of the jail being flung open from within, there appeared, in the first place, like a black shadow emerging into sunshine, the grim and grisly presence of the town beadle, with a sword by his side and his staff of office in his hand. This personage perfergued and presented in his aspect the whole dismal severity of the Puritanic code of law, which it was his business to administer in its final and closest application to the offender. Stretching forth the official staff in his left hand, he laid his right upon the shoulder of a young woman, whom he thus drew forward, until on the threshold of the prison door she repelled him by an action marked with natural dignity and force of character, and stepped into the open air as if by her own free will. She bore in her arms a child, a baby of some 3 months old, who winked and turned aside its little face from the too vivid light of day, because its existence heretofore had brought it acquainted only with the grey twilight of a dungeon, or other darksome apartment of the prison. When the young woman, the mother of this child, stood fully revealed before the crowd, it seemed to be her first impulse to clasp the infant closely to her bosom, not so much by an impulse of motherly affection as that she might thereby conceal a certain token which was wrought or fastened into her dress, In a moment, however, wisely judging that one token of her shame would but poorly serve to hide another, she took the baby on her arm, and, with a burning blush, and yet a haughty smile, and a glance that would not be abashed, looked around at her townspeople and neighbors. On the breast of her gown, in fine red cloth, surrounded with an elaborate embroidery and fantastic flourishes of gold thread, appeared the letter A. It was so artistically done, and with so much fertility and gorgeous luxuriance of fancy, that it had all the effect of a last and fitting decoration to the apparel which she wore, and which was of a splendor in accordance with the taste of age, but greatly beyond what was allowed by the sumptuary regulations of the colony. The young woman was tall, with a figure of perfect elegance on a large scale. She had dark and abundant hair, so glossy that it threw off the sunshine with a gleam, and a face which, besides being beautiful from regularity of feature and richness of complexion, had the impressiveness belonging to a marked brow and deep black eyes. She was ladylike, too, after the manner of the feminine gentility of those days, characterized by a certain state and dignity, rather than by the delicate, evanescent, and indescribable grace, which is now recognized as its indication. And never had Hester Prynne appeared more ladylike in the antique interpretation of the term than as she issued from the prison. Those who had known her and had expected to behold her dimmed and obscured by a disastrous cloud were astonished and even startled to perceive how her beauty shone out and made a halo of the misfortune and ignominy in which she was enveloped. It may be true that, to a sensitive observer, there was something exquisitely painful in it. Her attire, which indeed she had wrought for the occasion, in prison, and had modelled much after her own fancy, seemed to express the attitude of her spirit, the desperate recklessness of her mood, by its wild and picturesque peculiarity. But the point which drew all eyes, and, as it were, transfigured the wearer, so that both men and women who had been familiarly acquainted with Hester Prynne were now impressed, as they beheld her for the first time, with that scarlet letter so fantastically embroidered and illuminated upon her bosom. It had the effect of a spell, taking her out of the ordinary relations with humanity and enclosing her in a sphere by herself. "She hath good skill at her needle, that's certain," remarked one of her female spectators. "But did ever a woman, before this brazy hussy, contrive such a way of showing it? Why, gossips, what is it but to laugh in the faces of our godly magistrates, and make a pride out of what they, worthy gentlemen, meant for punishment?" "It were well," muttered the most iron-visaged of the old dames, "if we stripped Madam Hester's rich gown off her dainty shoulders. And as for the red letter, which she hath stitched so curiously, I'll bestow a rag of mine own rheumatic flannel to make a fitter one." "Oh, peace, neighbors, peace," whispered their youngest companion. "Do not let her hear you. Not a stitch in that embroidered letter but she has felt it in her heart." The grim beadle now made a gesture with his staff. "Make way, good people, make way in the king's name," cried he. "Open a passage, and I promise ye, Mr. Prynne, shall be set where man, woman, and child may have a fair sight of her brave apparel, from this time till an hour past meridian. A blessing on the righteous colony of the Massachusetts, where iniquity is dragged out into the sunshine. Come along, Madam Hester, and show your scarlet letter in the marketplace." A lane was forthwith opened through the crowd of spectators. Preceded by the beadle and attended by an irregular procession of stern-browed men and unkindly-visaged women, Hester Prynne sat forth towards the place appointed for her punishment. A crowd of eager and curious schoolboys, understanding little of the matter in hand, except that it gave them a half-holiday, ran before her progress, turning their heads continually to stare into her face, and at the winking baby in her arms, and at the ignominious letter on her breast. It was no great distance in those days from the prison door to the marketplace. Measured by the prisoner's experience, however, it might be reckoned a journey of some length, for, haughty as her demeanor was, she perchance underwent an agony from every footstep of those that thronged to see her, as if her heart had been flung into the street for them all to spurn and trample upon. In our nature, however, there is a provision, alike marvelous and merciful, and the sufferer should never know the intensity of what he endures by its present torture, but chiefly by the pang that rankles after it. With almost a serene deportment, therefore, Hester Prynne passed through this portion of her ordeal, and came to a sort of scaffold at the western extremity of the marketplace. It stood beneath the eaves of Boston's earliest church, and appeared to be a fixture there. Taking a quick break. Just a very quick break, squad. All right, squad, I am back. I was just thinking maybe when I take quick little breaks to get water and stuff, maybe I should play like some very soft music. I think I'm going to do that in the future. So you're not just like literally sitting here in silence. Oh my God. Yeah, some intermission music. That's something I'll do. Thanks for the GGs, Corey and Twitch for Fun. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm really enjoying reading it. Again, just trying to save my voice a little bit because I don't know why it's been so scratchy tonight. But I can't wait to talk about this when we're done reading chapter 2. Okay, so here we go. We're going to continue here with chapter 2. In fact, this scaffold constituted a portion of a penal machine, which now, for 2 or 3 generations past, has been merely historical and traditionary among us, but was held, in the old time, to be as an effectual an agent in the promotion of good citizenship, as ever was the guillotine among the terrorists of France. It was, in short, the platform of the pillory, and above it rose the framework of that instrument of discipline, so fashioned as to confine the human head in its tight grasp, and thus hold it up to the public gaze. The very ideal of ignominy was embodied and made manifest in this contrivance of wood and iron. There can be no outrage, methinks, against our common nature, whatever be the delinquencies of the individual. No outrage more flagrant than to forbid the culprit to hide his face for shame, as it was the essence of this punishment to do. In Hester Prynne's instance, however, as not unfrequently in other cases, her sentence bore that she should stand a certain time upon the platform, but without undergoing that gripe about the neck and confinement of the head, the proneness to which was the most devilish characteristic of this ugly engine. Knowing well her part, she ascended a flight of wooden steps, and was thus displayed to the surrounding multitude at about the height of a man's shoulders above the street. Had there been a Papist among the crowd of Puritans, he might have seen in this beautiful woman, so picturesque in her attire and mien, and with the infant at her bosom, an object to remind him of the image of divine maternity, which so many illustrious painters have vied with one another to represent, something which should remind him, indeed, but only by contrast, of that sacred image of sinless motherhood, whose infant was to redeem the world. Here there was the taint of deepest sin in the most sacred quality of human life, working such effect, that the world was only the darker for this woman's beauty, and the more lost for the infant that she had borne. The scene was not without a mixture of awe, such as must always invest the spectacle of guilt and shame in a fellow creature, before society shall have grown corrupt enough to smile, instead of shuddering at it. The witnesses of Hester Prynne's disgrace had not yet passed beyond their simplicity. They were stern enough to look upon her death, had that been the sentence, without a murmur at its severity, but had none of the heartlessness of another social state, which would find only a theme for jest in an exhibition like the present. Even had there been a disposition to turn the matter into ridicule, it must have been repressed and overpowered by the solemn presence of men, no less dignified than the governor, and several of his counselors, a judge, a general, and the ministers of the town, all of whom sat or stood in a balcony of the meeting-house, looking down upon the platform. When such personages could constitute a part of the spectacle, without risking the majesty or reverence of rank and office, it was safely to be inferred that the infliction of a legal sentence would have an earnest and effectual meaning. Accordingly, the crowd was sombre and grave. The unhappy culprit sustained herself as best a woman might, under the heavy weight of 1,000 unrelenting eyes, all fastened upon her, and concentrated at her bosom. It was almost intolerable to be borne. Of an impulsive and passionate nature, she had fortified herself to encounter the stings and venomous stabs of public contumely, wreaking itself in every variety of insult. But there was a quality so much more terrible in the solemn mood of the popular mind, that she longed rather to behold all these rigid countenances contorted with scornful merriment, and herself the object. Had a roar of laughter burst from the multitude, each man, each woman, each little shrill-voiced child, contributing their individual parts, Hester Prynne might have repaid them all with a bitter and disdainful smile. But under the leaden infliction which it was her doom to endure, she felt at moments as if she must needs shriek out with the full power of her lungs, and cast herself from the scaffold down upon the ground, or else go mad at once. Yet there were intervals when the whole scene, in which she was the most conspicuous object, seemed to vanish from her eyes, or at least glimmered indistinctly before them, like a mass of imperfectly shaped and spectral images. Her mind, and especially her memory, was preternaturally active and kept bringing up other scenes than this rough-hewn street of a little town on the edge of the western wilderness. Other faces that were lowering upon her from beneath the brims of those steeple-crowned hats. Reminiscences, the most trifling and immaterial, passages of infancy and school days, sports, childish quarrels, and the little domestic traits of her maiden years came swarming back upon her, intermingled with recollections of whatever was gravest in her subsequent life. One picture precisely as vivid as another, as if all were of similar importance, or all alike a play. Possibly it was an indistinctive device of her spirit to relieve itself by the exhibition of these phantasmagoric forms from the cruel weight and hardness of the reality. By that as it might, the scaffold of the pillory was a point of view that revealed to Hester Prynne the entire track along which she had been treading since her happy infancy. Standing on that miserable eminence, she saw again her native village in Old England and her paternal home, a decayed house of grey stone, with a poverty-stricken aspect, but retaining a half-obliterated shield of arms over the portal, in token of antique gentility. She saw her father's face, with its bald brow and reverend white beard that flowed over the old-fashioned Elizabethan ruff. Her mother's, too, with the look of heedful and anxious love which it always wore in her remembrance, and which, even since her death, had so often laid the impediment of a gentle remonstrance in her daughter's pathway. She saw her own face, glowing with girlish beauty, and illuminating all the interior of the dusky mirror in which she had been wont to gaze at it. There she beheld another countenance, of a man well stricken in years, a pale, thin, scholar-like visage, with eyes dim and bleared by the lamplight that had served them to pore over many ponderous books. Yet those same bleared optics had a strange, penetrating power, when it was their owner's purpose to read the human soul. This figure of the study and the cloister, as Hester Prynne's womanly fancy failed not to recall, was slightly deformed, with the left shoulder a trifle higher than the right. Next rose before her, in memory's picture gallery, the intricate and narrow thoroughfares, the tall, grey houses, the huge cathedrals, and the public edifices, ancient in date and quaint in architecture, of a continental city, where a new life had awaited her, still in connection with the misshapen scholar. A new life, but feeding itself on time-worn materials, like a tuft of green moss on a crumbling wall. Lastly, in lieu of these shifting scenes, came back to the rude marketplace of the Puritan settlement, with all the townspeople assembled and levelling their stern regards at Hester Prynne. Yes, at herself, who stood on the scaffold of the pillory, an infant on her arm, and the letter A, in scarlet, fantastically embroidered with gold thread, upon her bosom. Chapter 2 is done, squad. Get some hypes in the chat. Chapter 2 is done. Oh my gosh. Get some Bob Rosses. Wow. Wow, squad. Wow. Whoa. That was so good. Thank you, Solaris, for the follow. Thank you so much for that follow. I really appreciate that. Solaris, if you're still here, thank you so much for that follow. Welcome. Wow, what a chapter, man. What do you guys think about all this descriptive language and these big fancy words? basically that whole chapter describing Hester Prynne on the scaffold, on this platform, being displayed to the whole town when everybody's there staring at her, right? With the letter A on her bosom, on her chest. Wow. And then she had all of these thoughts towards the latter half of the chapter of seeing these visions and things coming back to her in her life, like her father and a city where she could go and live, and just all these things. Like she's just kind of going through images in her mind as she was standing up there on the scaffold. All right, here we go. Chapter 3, The Recognition. From the intense consciousness of being the object of severe and universal observation, the wearer of the Scarlet Letter was at length relieved by discerning, on the outskirts of the crowd, a figure which irresistibly took possession of her thoughts. An Indian in his native garb was standing there, but the red men were not so infrequent visitors of the English settlements that one of them would have attacked any notice from Hester Prynne at such a time, much less would have excluded all other objects and ideas from her mind. By the Indian's side, and evidently sustaining a companionship with him, stood a white man, clad in a strange disarray of civilized and savage costume. He was small in stature, with a furrowed visage which, as yet, could hardly be termed aged. There was a remarkable intelligence in his features, as of a person who had so cultivated his mental part that it could not fail to mold the physical to itself, and become manifest by unmistakable tokens. Although, by a seemingly careless arrangement of his heterogeneous garb, he had endeavored to conceal or abate the peculiarity, it was so sufficiently evident to Hester Prynne that one of this man's shoulders rose higher than the other. Again, at the first instant of perceiving that thin visage and the slight deformity of the figure, she pressed her infant to her bosom with so convulsive a force that the poor babe uttered another cry of pain. But the mother did not seem to hear it. At his arrival in the marketplace, and some time before she saw him, the stranger had bent his eyes on Hester Prynne. It was carelessly at first, like a man chiefly accustomed to look inward, and to whom external matters are of little value and import, unless they bear relation to something within his mind. Very soon, however, his look became keen and penetrative. A writhing horror twisted itself across his features, like a snake gliding swiftly over them, and making one little pause, with all its wreathed intervolutions in open sight. His face darkened with some powerful emotion, which nevertheless he so instantaneously controlled by an effort of his will, that, save at a single moment, its expression might have passed for calmness. After a brief space, the convulsion grew almost imperceptible, and finally subsided into the depths of his nature. When he found the eyes of Hester Prynne fastened on his own, and saw that she appeared to recognize him, he slowly and calmly raised his finger, made a gesture with it in the air, and laid it on his lips. Then, touching the shoulder of a townsman who stood next to him, he addressed him in a formal and courteous manner. "I pray you, good sir," said he, "who is this woman, and wherefore is she here set up to public shame?" "You must needs be a stranger in this region, friend," answered the townsman, looking curiously at the questioner and his savage companion, "else you would surely have heard of Mistress Hester Prynne, and her evil doings. She hath raised a great scandal, I promise you, in godly Master Dimmesdale's church." "You say truly," replied the other. "I am a stranger, and I've been a wanderer, sorely against my will. I have met with grievous mishaps by sea and land, and have been long held in bonds among the heathen folk to the southward, and am now brought hither by this Indian to be redeemed out of my captivity. Will it please you, therefore, to tell me of Hester Prynne's, have I her name rightly, of this woman's offences, and what has brought her to yonder scaffold? Truly, friend, and methinks it must gladden your heart, after your troubles and sojourn in the wilderness, said the townsman, to find yourself, at length, in a land where iniquity is searched out and punished in the sight of rulers and people, as here in our godly New England. Yonder woman, sir, you must know, was the wife of a certain learned man, English by birth, but who had long dwelt in Amsterdam, whence, some good time agone, he was minded to cross over and cast in his lot with us in Massachusetts. To this purpose he sent his wife before him, renaming himself to look after some necessary affairs. Marry, good sir, in some 2 years or less, that the woman had been a dweller here in Boston. No tidings have come of this learned gentleman, Master Prynne, and his young wife, look you, being left to her own misguidance. Ah, ha, I conceive you, said the stranger with a bitter smile. So learned a man as you speak of should have learned this too in his books, and who, by your favour, sir, may be the father of yonder babe. It is some 3 or 4 months old, I should judge, which Mistress Prynne is holding in her arms. Of a truth, friend, that matter remaineth a riddle, said the Daniel who shall expound, is it yet a wanting, answered the townsman. Madam Hester absolutely refuseth to speak, and the magistrates have laid their heads together in vain. Peradventure the guilty one stands looking on at this sad spectacle, unknown of man, and forgetting that God sees him. The learned man, observed the stranger with another smile, should come himself to look into the mystery. It behooves him well, if he still be in life, responded the townsman. Now, good sir, our Massachusetts magistrate be thinking themselves that this woman is youthful and fair, and doubtless was strongly tempted to her fall, and that, moreover, as is most likely, her husband may be at the bottom of the sea. They have not been bold to put into the force the extremity of our righteous law against her. The penalty thereof is death. But in their great mercy and tenderness of heart, they have doomed Mistress Prynne to stand only a space of 3 hours on the platform of the pillory, and then and thereafter, for the remainder of her natural life, to wear a mark of shame upon her bosom. A wise sentence, remarked the stranger, gravely bowing his head. Thus she will be a living sermon against sin, until the ignominious letter be engraved upon her tombstone. It irks me, nevertheless, that the partner of iniquity should not at least stand on the scaffold by her side. But he will be known. He will be known. He will be known. He bowed courteously to the communicative townsman, and, whispering a few words to his Indian attendant, they both made their way through the crowd. While this passed, Hester Prynne had been standing on her pedestal, still with a fixed gaze towards the stranger, so fixed a gaze that, at moments of intense absorption, all other objects in the visible world seemed to vanish, leaving only him and her. Such an interview, perhaps, would have been more terrible than even to meet him as she now did, with the hot midday sun burning down upon her face, and lighting up its shame, with the scarlet token of infamy on her breast, with the sin-born infant in her arms, with a whole people drawn forth as to a festival, staring at the features that should have been seen only in the quiet gleam of the fireside, in the happy shadow of a home, or beneath a matronly veil at church. Dreadful as it was, she was conscious of a shelter in the presence of these 1,000 witnesses. It was better to stand thus, with so many betwixt him and her, than to greet him face to face, they two alone. She fled for refuge, as it were, to the public exposure, and dreaded the moment when its protection should be withdrawn from her. Involved in these thoughts, she scarcely heard a voice behind her, until it repeated her name more than once, in a loud and solemn tone, audible to the whole multitude. "Hearken unto me, Hester Prynne," said the voice. It has already been noticed that directly over the platform on which Hester Prynne stood was a kind of balcony, or open gallery, appended to the meeting-house. It was the place whence proclamations were wont to be made, amidst an assemblage of the magistracy, with all the ceremonial that attended such public observances in those days. Here, to witness the scene which we are describing, sat Governor Bellingham himself, with 4 sergeants about his chair, bearing halberds as a guard of honor. He wore a dark feather in his hat, a border of embroidery on his cloak, and a black velvet tunic beneath. A gentleman advanced in years, with a hard experience written in his wrinkles. He was not ill-fitted to be the head and representative of a community which owed its origin and progress, and its present state of development, not to the impulses of youth, but to the stern and tempered energies of manhood, and the sombre sagacity of age, accomplishing so much, precisely because it imagined and hoped so little. The other eminent characters by whom the chief ruler was surrounded were distinguished by a dignity of mien, belonging to a period when the forms of authority were felt to possess the sacredness of divine institutions. They were, doubtless, good men, just and sage. But, out of the whole human family, it would not have been easy to select the same number of wise and virtuous persons, who should be less capable of sitting in judgment on an erring woman's heart, and disentangling its mesh of good and evil, than the sages of rigid aspect towards whom Hester Prynne now turned her face. She seemed conscious, indeed, that whatever sympathy she might expect lay in the larger and warmer heart of the multitude. For, as she lifted her eyes towards the balcony, the unhappy women grew pale and trembled. I'm going to take a quick break. I'm taking a quick voice break, squad. I'm still here taking a break. 1 second. Okay, squad, let's do this. We're going to keep going here with Chapter 3, The Recognition. The voice which had called her attention was that of the Reverend and famous John Wilson, the eldest clergyman of Boston, a great scholar, like most of his contemporaries in the profession, and withal a man of kind and genial spirit. This last attribute, however, had been less carefully developed than his intellectual gifts, and was, in truth, rather a matter of shame than self-congratulation with him. There he stood, with a border of grizzled locks beneath his skull cap, while his gray eyes, accustomed to the shaded light of his study, were winking, like those of Hester's infant, in the unadulterated sunshine. He looked like the darkly engraved portraits which we see prefixed to old volumes of sermons, and had no right than one of those portraits would have to step forth, as he now did, and meddle with a question of human guilt, passion, and anguish. "Hester Prynne," said the clergyman, "I have striven with my young brother here, under whose preaching of the word you have been privileged to sit." Here Mr. Wilson laid his hand on the shoulder of a pale young man beside him. "I have sought, I say, to persuade this godly youth that he should deal with you, here in the face of heaven, and before these wise and upright rulers, and in the hearing of all the people, as touching the vileness and blackness of your sin. Knowing your natural temper better than I, he could the better judge what arguments to use, whether of tenderness or terror, such as might prevail over your hardness and obstinacy, insomuch that you should no longer hide the name of him who tempted you to this grievous fall. But he opposes to me, with a young man's over-softness, albeit wise beyond his years, that it were wronging the very nature of a woman to force her to lay open her heart's secrets in such broad daylight, and in the presence of so a great a multitude. Truly, as I sought to convince him, the shame lay in the commission of the sin, and not in the showing of it forth. What say you to it? Once again, Brother Dimmesdale? Must it be thou, or I, that shall deal with this poor sinner's soul? There was a murmur among the dignified and reverend occupants of the balcony, and Governor Bellingham gave expression to its purport, speaking in an authoritative voice, although tempered with respect towards the youthful clergyman whom he addressed. "Good Master Dimmesdale," said he, "the responsibility of this woman's soul lies greatly with you. It behooves you, therefore, to exhort her to repentance and to confession as a proof and consequence thereof." The directness of this appeal drew the eyes of the whole crowd upon the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale, a young clergyman who had come from one of the great English universities, bringing all the learning of the age into our wild forest land. His eloquence and religious fervor had already given the earnest of high eminence in his profession. He was a person of very striking aspect, with a white, lofty, and impending brow, large, brown, melancholy eyes, and a mouth which, unless when he forcibly compressed it, was apt to be tremulous, expressing both nervous sensibility and a vast power of self-restraint. Notwithstanding his high native gifts and scholar-like attainments, there was an air about this young minister, an apprehensive, a startled, a half-frightened look, as of a being who felt himself quite astray and at a loss in the pathway of human existence, and could only be at ease in some seclusion of his own. Therefore, so far as his duties would permit, he trod in the shadowy bypaths, and thus kept himself simple and childlike, coming forth, when occasion was, with a freshness and fragrance and dewy purity of thought, which, as many people said, affected them like the speech of an angel. Such was the young man whom the Reverend Mr. Wilson and the governor had introduced so openly to the public notice, bidding him speak, in the hearing of all men, to that mystery of a woman's soul, so sacred even in its pollution. The trying nature of his position drove blood from his cheek, and made his lips tremulous. "Speak to the woman, my brother," said Mr. Wilson. "It is the moment to her soul, and therefore, as the worshipful governor says, momentous to thine own, in whose charges hers is. Exhort her to confess the truth." The Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale bent his head in silent prayer, as it seemed, and then came forward. "Hester Prynne," said he, leaning over the balcony, and looking down steadfastly into her eyes, "thou hearest what this good man says, and seest the accountability under which I labor. If thou feelest it to be for thy soul's peace, and that thy earthly punishment will thereby be made more effectual to salvation, I charge thee to speak out the name of thy fellow sinner and fellow sufferer. Be not silent from any mistaken pity and tenderness for him, for, believe me, Hester, though he were to step down from a high place and stand there beside thee, on thy pedestal of shame, yet better were it so than to hide a guilty heart through life. What can thy silence do for him, except it tempt him, yea, compel him, as it were, to add hypocrisy to sin? Heaven hath granted thee an open ignominy, that thereby thou mayest work out an open triumph over the evil within thee and the sorrow without. Take heed how thou deniest to him, who perchance hath not the courage to grasp it for himself, the bitter but wholesome cup that is now presented to thy lips." The young pastor's voice was tremulously sweet, rich, deep, and broken. The feeling that it so evidently manifested rather than the direct purport of the words, caused it to vibrate within all hearts, and brought the listeners into one accord of sympathy. Even the poor baby at Hester's bosom was affected by the same influence, for it directed its hitherto vacant gaze towards Mr. Dimmesdale, and held up its little arms with a half-pleased, half-plaintive murmur. So powerful seemed the minister's appeal that the people could not believe but that Hester Prynne would speak out the guilty name, or else that the guilty one himself, in whatever high or lowly place he stood, would be drawn forth by an inward and inevitable necessity and compelled to ascend to the scaffold. Hester shook her head. "Woman, transgress not beyond the limits of heaven's mercy," cried the Reverend Mr. Wilson, more harshly than before. "That little babe hath been gifted with a voice to second and confirm the counsel which thou hast heard. Speak out the name. That and thy repentance may avail to take the scarlet letter off thy breast." "Never," replied Hester Prynne, looking not at Mr. Wilson, but into the deep and troubled eyes of the younger clergyman. "It is too deeply branded. Ye cannot take it off, and would I might endure his agony as well as mine." "Speak, woman," said another voice, coldly and sternly, proceeding from the crowd about the scaffold. "Speak, and give your child a father." "I will not speak," answered Hester, turning pale as death, but responding to this voice, which she too surely recognized. "And my child must seek a heavenly father. She shall never know an earthly one." "She will not speak," murmured Mr. Dimmesdale, who, leaning over the balcony with his hand upon his heart, had awaited the result of his appeal. He now drew back with a long respiration. "Wondrous strength and generosity of a woman's heart! She will not speak!" Discerning the impracticable state of the poor culprit's mind, the elder clergyman, who had carefully prepared himself for the occasion, addressed to the multitude a discourse on sin in all its branches, but with continual reference to the ignominious letter. So forcibly did he dwell upon this symbol, for the hour or more during which his periods were rolling over the people's heads, that it assumed new terrors in their imagination, and seemed to drive its scarlet hue from the flames of the infernal pit. Hester Prynne, meanwhile, kept her place upon the pedestal of shame, with glazed eyes and an air of weary indifference. She had borne that morning all that nature could endure, and as her temperament was not of the order that escapes from too intense suffering by a swoon, her spirit could only shelter itself beneath a stony crust of insensibility, while the faculties of animal life remained entire. In this state, the voice of the preacher thundered remorselessly, but unevangelically, upon her ears. The infant, during the latter portion of her ordeal, pierced the air with its wailings and screams. She strove to hush it, mechanically, but seemed scarcely to sympathize with its trouble. With the same hard demeanor she was led back to prison, and vanished from the public gaze within its iron-clamped portal. It was whispered, by those who peered after her, that the scarlet letter threw a lurid gleam along the dark passageway of the interior. Chapter 3. That's chapter 3. GG, we finished it. Oh my gosh. GG. Okay, I guess I can talk. I'm just whispering because we're done with chapter 3. Oh my gosh, that was good. Squad. Yeah, get some little Bible thumps going on. That was a little sad. Yeah, I did it. What time is it? 10:45. Okay, so I've been probably reading straight for almost an hour and 45 minutes. And I'm starting to feel it now in my mouth. Like, you know? Oh, wow. Wow, what a chapter, folks. Hester Prynne, Reverend Dimsdale, Magistrate Wilson. So did you guys get it? Before I talk about it, because I can talk about it a lot. What did you guys get from that chapter? There are some mean people in this book. Did you understand the chapter? Like basic, like what's happening in the chapter? You need a minute. No problem. I need a minute. I'm going to let this music play, and I'm actually going to take a real break. So, squad, I'll be back, but I'm going to actually take a quick real break while you guys ponder over chapter 3 with this nice loyalty-free music. Okay, I'll be right back, squad. Don't go anywhere. Enjoy pondering over chapter 3, and then we're going to talk about it when I get back. Let me make sure this music doesn't go anywhere. No, I don't want chase music. I would like classical. Thank you. Okay, squad. You understood about 40%. There were some big words. Yeah, there are definitely some big words, for sure. Okay, I'll be right back, squad. Don't go anywhere. Alright, squad, I am back. Sorry about that. I need to take a real break. This music's intense. I didn't even know. I just have it on some royalty-free classical music. I don't even know what's playing. I got that the clergy dudes really wanted her to tell who the father is, but she is refusing to. Beyond that, I couldn't tell much more. You are exactly right, Corey. You are spot on that section of that chapter, for sure. For sure. Oh my god, no joke. Like, on this playlist on YouTube for this music, it says dramatic, tense music. So, Corey, you were spot on. Dramatic, intense music. That's hilarious. Let me try to get one that's not so crazy town. There we go. That's better, maybe, hopefully. Okay, so, squad. So with chapter 3, called it. Let me get my Kindle back on. Did it turn off on me? I guess it turns off. I'm still learning my Kindle and how to use it. So in chapter 3, we start off with her, you know, on this scaffold, up on this platform, right? Where the whole town's looking at her. Kind of like the gallows, right? That kind of a thing. And she looks across, the very beginning of chapter 3, she looks across the crowd of people. And she actually, her eyes meet up with what they, you know, so far in the book, no spoilers, is with a stranger called the Stranger. And did you guys catch the stranger looking at Hester and Hester looking at the stranger, that it did make clear that she recognized who that stranger was. And the stranger was the one that had the Indian next to him, and the stranger asked the townsman, he was like, "What is this? What's going on? Who is that lady up there?" He didn't know what was going on. And in that conversation, the townsman proceeds to tell her this whole background of, like, you know, like the whole background about who this lady is and what's going on with her. You didn't realize that? And, oh, maybe he's the dad. Right, and these are all good predictions. These are all things you should be doing when you read, is like predicting and trying to figure out stuff. I'm trying to just find this section here real quick, squad. So right here, I'm just going to read the lines when she completely recognizes him and what he does, the stranger. It says, "When he found the eyes of Hester Prynne fastened on his own, and saw that she appeared to recognize him, he slowly and calmly raised his finger, made a gesture with it in the air, and laid it on his lips." So when he saw that she saw him and appeared to recognize him, what did he do? What does it say that he did? He raised his finger, put it in the air, put it to his lips, and he's like telling her what? Shh. Like, no. Shh. Yeah, don't say anything. Like, I know you see me over here as the stranger, but I know you know me, and I see that you recognize me, and don't say anything. Like, yes, shh, don't tell anyone, right? And then that's when the stranger guy says, you know, what's going on? Who is this woman? What's going on? Who's this woman? Why is she up there for public shame? Sorry guys, I'm trying to get calmer orchestra music and I just can't, everything is too crazy. Like, listen to this. Listen, I mean, it's nothing wrong with, I love classical, but I'm trying to find, listen to this. I'm trying to find calmer classical music while we discuss. I can't. I'm just going to play something. Okay, here's Moonlight Sonata. This is good. Perfect. By Beethoven. Okay, we got Moonlight Sonata. We're good now. This will be great. Okay. Okay, so yeah. So he's like, look, don't say anything. He puts the finger to the mouth. He's like, shh, you know. He goes, what's going on? Who's this lady? Why is she up there? Tell me what's going on. The guy, the townsman's like, what are you talking about? How do you not know who this lady is? And then what he says is, he kind of gives a background about Hester, this townsman, to this stranger guy. And the guy says, yonder woman, meaning Hester, sir, you must know, was the wife of a certain learned man, English by birth. So right there he says, you should know that she's the wife of some learned man. Basically just meaning a very intellectual, a very smart man. They lived in Amsterdam a long time ago. And that he was supposed to cross over and cast in his lot with us. He was supposed to come over here on a boat and live here in Massachusetts. So for this purpose, he sent his wife before him, remaining himself to look after some necessary affairs. So right there it says, to this purpose, he sent his wife to come ahead to Massachusetts while he finished up some necessary affairs, business that he had to attend to, and that he planned to come, you know, after he sent his wife here. So then he says, in some 2 years or less, this woman has been living here in Boston, but nothing has been, you know, nothing has come up about this learned gentleman. Like nobody even knows about this guy, this supposed husband. It's not even like we haven't even heard of him. Is he even around? Is he doing anything to come here? It's been a long time and he's supposed to be here, but he's just not. So everybody's just kind of in like, what's going on, you know? KD has made a purchase to support the stream on the blacksmith. Thank you so much, KD. KD, if you're out there lurking, thank you so much. Can we get some hypes in the chat, please? And some Stryker Squad hearts for KD making a purchase on the blacksmith, Amazon blacksmith overlay. Thank you so much, KD. How are you doing tonight? If you're here, that was very nice. Hey, KD. No, you're fine. You're fine. Don't worry about being late. And I am going to, of course, have the VODs on my Twitch channel that you guys can watch. But I'm also going to be posting my VODs to YouTube. So anytime, if you want to go back and listen to the story, I'm going to make it very clear about the chapters and everything. So I think that'll help. Thank you, Katie, so much for the purchase on the blacksmith. I appreciate that so much. Yeah, we just read chapters 1 through 3 tonight. Took about almost 2 hours. And I'm like, my mouth is like, I'm done reading tonight, you know? Like, it's like, I think about an hour and a half to 2 hours is about the max that I could probably read. And then I came into the stream tonight already kind of having like a raspy voice. I'm not sick, but I don't really know what's going on. So I was like, yeah, it was great. So we're just kind of talking about chapter 3 right now, KD. Hopefully that's okay. I mean, spoiler wise, it's still early in the book, so I think it's okay. But thank you again for that purchase. I appreciate it. So basically, squad, this towns guy, you know, is telling the stranger, well, we haven't seen the husband. He sent his wife ahead to come here because they're supposed to be living here, but he's not here yet. So where is he? And then the stranger says, "Oh, okay. And then the stranger says, "Well, who is the father of this child that she's holding? I mean, the child looks like she's 3 or 4 months old." And then that's when the townsman says, "I don't know. Madam Hester, she refuses to speak the name." So the townspeople don't know. He doesn't know. And then the stranger says, this learned man, he should come himself to look into this mystery. Do you get that? I mean, what is he saying here? The stranger guy says, this learned man, he's talking about the husband of Hester. He should come here. He should look into this mystery of what's going on, you know? You're not able to pull that together. That's okay. I mean, this is a very... Classic literature tends to be very long, drawn-out, descriptive sentences that can absolutely get very confusing. And this particular book, Scarlet Letter, the words in the English words that they use are like thee and thou, and those can also, if you're not used to reading those kind of words and what do they mean, it's like we're reading Shakespeare. And so it can get a little bit wordy there. There was a lot of depth in this chapter. A lot of details of learning about characters in chapter 3. Really introducing us to this stranger character. The Reverend Dimsdale and Reverend Wilson, to Hester Prynne, who finally speaks and says she's not going to say anything. So, kind of getting into the middle of chapter 3. I'm just kind of reading here. A really famous line from the stranger here in chapter 3 is when the stranger says, as his final saying to this townsman, he says, well, she's going to be living a living sermon against sin until the ignominious letter be engraved upon her tombstone. It irks me, nevertheless, that the partner of her iniquity should not at least stand on the scaffold by her side. So the stranger's like, it kind of bothers me, nevertheless, like that. I mean, I know she's going to have this sin until she's dead, but like, it really bothers me. Like, where is the partner? Where's the father? Where's the guy that's supposed to be up there with her? And then the stranger says, but he will be known, he will be known, he will be known. I mean, Hawthorne, the author, repeats that line 3 times in a row to make it crystal clear that this stranger character really is going to do his best to make it known who this person is. It's repeated 3 times. But we still don't know who the stranger is. I mean, we don't know. Yeah, Corey said maybe that's the father. He could be the father. He could not be the father. So Hawthorne just dabbles into this stranger character, but we don't really know too much about him yet. But we do know something very important. And that is that Hester Prynne and the stranger do know each other. Because she saw him, he saw that she recognized him, and he put his finger up to his mouth and said, shh. So that's a pretty revealing part of chapter 3. And then, it goes into describing the magistrates that are sitting behind her on the balcony above her, and how they're all, talking about, why are you not saying the name of the father? And then Reverend Wilson, the eldest clergyman, so he's the oldest one. He goes to the young clergyman Dimsdale, and he did a nice description of Dimsdale. Did you catch that Reverend Dimsdale was younger? He was also someone who came here to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, bringing a lot of religious fervor to the area, and had a really great way of speaking to where he really pulled in the people to what he was saying. And it's like, he's just really good. He's a really good, speaker, Reverend Dimsdale. But he has this interesting face about him where it talks about a startled, half-frightened look. Where he's like, sometimes he looks a little bit fearful and other times he doesn't. So he's kind of like has a a face that's not always calm. But the biggest thing with him is that the way he speaks and the way he pulls people in with his words. So that's one of the biggest things with chapter 3 with Dimmesdale. So Reverend Wilson says to Dimmesdale, will you please plead with Hester Prynne to say something about the father? So he has his first speech, which is a really nice one, Dimmesdale. Very charismatic, yes. Yes. And he's like, I charge you, I'm asking you to speak out the name of thy fellow sinner, of your fellow sinner and fellow sufferer. Don't take pity or tenderness for him, because believe me, if he could step down from a high place and stand there beside you, he would, instead of hiding a guilty heart through his life. So he says all of this. He makes his long speech about, can you not just say who it is? It probably will make him feel better in a way so that he doesn't have to go through life with a guilty heart, right? His voice was sweet, rich, deep, and broken. And then the first time she speaks, she shakes her head. Well, first she shakes her head, right? She's like, doesn't even say a word. It says Hester shook her head. So after that whole speech, she doesn't even say anything. And then people start now yelling out to her from the crowd. And then even the eldest clergyman, Mr. Wilson, he's a little bit more aggressive now. And he's like, look, you need to speak, and you need to say the name of the Father. And he's a little more aggressive now. He's not so kind. And that's when she finally says, never. It's too deeply branded. You can't take it off. And would that I might endure his agony as well as mine. Basically, I will take on his agony as well as mine. I'm not going to speak his name, is what he's saying. I'm sorry, what she is saying. And then Dimmesdale says, you know what? She's not going to speak. Wondrous strength. She has such strength and generosity. She's not going to speak. What wondrous strength and generosity of a woman's heart, she will not speak. Like almost like, can you believe how strong she is? She has such a strong, generous heart that she's not going to speak out the name. Then after that, people start, yelling out, say the name, say the name. And it ends with a very beautiful narrative at the end of chapter 3. Where, as she's walking back into the iron-clamped portal, what a beautiful description of the prison door, an iron-clamped portal. It was whispered by those who peered after her, who are looking after her, that the Scarlet Letter threw a lurid gleam along the dark passageway of the interior. So it's almost like you can imagine her walking into this portal, into this walkway, the prison, and along the walls, it was whispered among those who peered after her that it had this gleam that shone on the walls, like the letter, like let off this glow. Which is, pretty neat to think that could have happened. And lurid, it says a lurid gleam. Lurid is actually something that's very vivid in color, that it actually creates an unpleasantly harsh or unnatural effect. So a lurid gleam is something that's like a light on the wall that is actually unnaturally kind of disturbing. So even though it was, what that last line's trying to do is just say, not that it's supernatural, but like almost like it had a supernatural element that was a little bit like, whoa, is that supposed to be doing that? Like, is that normal? Like this glow coming off the letter as she walked it back to the prison. So basically we know at this point in time of chapters 1 through 3 is we have a main character, Hester Prynne, with a 3 to 4 month old baby that she's got with her with the letter A on her chest that she has just meticulously adorned with gold thread. So that tells you a lot about that character, that she has this letter A, a scarlet A, the red A on her chest, just like the pictures on the screen. And she's actually, he makes it a really big point, Hawthorne, of how much time she put into embroidering the A, that she actually embroidered it with gold thread. So she had to sew this onto her chest, but in the A itself, she made it absolutely beautiful. So it's not like she did an A that was just put together like just crap, you know? The A that she made was just like something, like it even said in the chapter, like it's something that you would put on, not for this purpose of A, of what it stands for, but it would be to really decorate something beautiful. That's how much effort she put into the A. And that's when the women at the beginning of the book, you know, the women that were whispering and gossiping about her, and they're like, how can she do that? The magistrates have put shame upon her. She has to stand on the scaffold. How could she embroider that A with gold thread and make it look like a decoration? Are you kidding me? I mean, that's what all the gossipers, the ladies, are talking about. Like, that's ridiculous. So, yeah. So what do y'all think? I'm going to stop talking now for a minute and let you guys... Did that help going through it? Me talking about it? Ask me questions. Ask any questions and I'll tell you no lies. Ha ha ha. But I'm going to take like a minute to stop talking because like my mouth is like going to fall off. So discuss amongst yourselves. But yeah, I'm super pumped, super excited for how the first ever book club went tonight. I really can't thank you guys enough for being here and hanging out and just supporting this, little caveat to the channel. And I think it's going to be a fun one. I think we're going to enjoy it. And it's, like I said, it's not every night. And I just appreciate the support. You know, I'll be playing the game prior to book club, so you can come in for the game. Like, I think Testosterone said that. And stay for the book club. Oh, that would be great. But I'm gonna call it here tonight. I hope you guys have a great morning, day, night, wherever you are. I think most of you guys are here where it's nighttime where you are. It's about 11:40 my time. But I'll be back tomorrow. We'll continue book club tomorrow. So we'll start with a warm-up game first at around 7 o'clock Central Standard Time and then move into book club after that. But thank you guys so much for all the support. It means so much to me. I know many of you guys, I think all of you guys follow me on Twitter. If you don't, there's my Twitter link. I really appreciate the retweets that you can shout out on Twitter for me at any time. I so appreciate that. I always send a tweet when I go live, so you can retweet that out as well. Young Grass, it was just started. I just made the announcement like a week ago. On stream about starting up a book club a couple nights a week for the stream. And, yeah. So it was just recently announced, probably here in the best dang country. Yeah, so it's pretty new announcement and some changes with the stream a little bit. Yeah. So, but thanks guys for being here, and I hope to see you guys tomorrow. And stay safe. And have a great night, guys. I'm pumped. We had a great first night for book club. Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you something to read. Yeah, absolutely, Young Grass. And like I said, everything that is related to book club I have in my Amazon Blacksmith, which only is active when I'm live streaming, which I find a little strange. The component or the overlay is over the actual video player. And you have to be, I think, on PC to see the overlay, but when you see it, you can scroll through all the items, and I have one category called Book Club, and I have the Scarlet Letter on there, and I have Kindles, I have e-readers and stuff that you can order through Amazon. If you click on the actual image, it'll take you to Amazon through my link. and nothing else happens. You pretty much just order something through Amazon like you normally would, but I get a very, very small percentage of the cost of the item. And it's just another way to support the stream. So, oh no, you're fine, Young Grass. No problem at all. No problem at all. I hope to see you guys tomorrow, though. And I figure I'm still tweaking the music and things I'm going to do and how I'm going to work that out. But I think it was a huge success. So I am just excited to continue this journey with you guys. And have a great night. So without further ado, this is Stryker 500 signing off and wishing all the loyal squad members out there a safe and happy evening. Until then, squad, stay safe and adios.